In this video, I want to ask if the Faustian deal we made with thinking, was it all worth it? As if any Faustian deal is. And at some point in our past, one of our ancestors discovered or invented thinking, and that slowly became central to our identity, to where Descartes said it as, I think, therefore I am, putting thoughts as necessary for our existence. And Descartes identified the soul as the rational part of humanity, and the rest was just baggage. And I used to test this value system with my students. This is a long time ago, back when House was popular. And the interesting thing about this character House, he was a medical doctor, and he was an absolute wizard at thinking and solving problems, but he was miserable in every other aspect of life and totally unhappy, a drug addict, and just an overall miserable human being unless he was solving puzzles. So I would put this Faustian deal to the students. I would say, would you rather be House or someone who is below average in intelligence, but blissfully happy and content with life? And they never liked this deal because they wanted the best of both worlds, and they wanted to be the blissfully happy genius. And after working with them for a long time, I had, no, that you have to pick one or the other. And they would very slowly, reluctantly admit that if they were honest, they actually want to be House over the slightly less intelligent but blissful human being, which says a lot about our value system. Now, there's no doubt this trick of thinking in certain situations is impressive and uniquely human. And so if we take our dog for a walk, invariably, and it's happened maybe hundreds of times over the years, he gets his leash tied around the post of a mailbox, and he can't figure out how to solve this problem. He just keeps putting forth all this effort to try to escape, and he just gets deeper into the problem with more effort. And any human kid easily solves it. They realize you have to back up, and that's how you get out of this mess. And so in that sense, we can outthink our dogs, and it makes us seem very clever, but that's a very limited problem, one variable problem, one thought at a time. What about something that's really complex? How does our thinking hold up there? Like when the pandemic hit the globe, did we appeal to our think tanks around the world and said, well, you've been thinking about this. What'd you come up with? Oh, well, we've come up with, here's our plan. It's if you do this, this, and this, then the problem is solved. Or did we just make stuff up as we went and then retrospectively look to see what was working? Well, you could debate this, but I would guess that most of you would be like myself and say that we pretty much went with option 2 far more than the first one. And you might say, well, here you are doing a video taking advantage of science and technology, and isn't that all from thinking? Thousands of years of thinking? No. I would say that when we look at the science equation, it's supposed to be half theory, half data. I would say it's about 1% of bumbling in the dark in terms of thinking, 99% of conscious observation to see if we're on track. So if we look at engineering, did they just build these amazing, the Golden Gate Bridge? Was it just built because they sat around and thought about how to do it? Or was it thousands of years, at least hundreds of years of building one bridge and having it fail, building another and having it fail, and then consciously observing where the failure was and how to improve it, and that slow process of trial and error. Or think about surgical techniques or the many accidents that you see in science, where from antibiotics to schizophrenic medication to chemotherapy, so many of these were just accidental discoveries. But the credit goes not to thinking and theorizing, it goes to conscious observation of noticing what seems to be working. And if we take maybe the icon of what people think of as thinking, Albert Einstein, did Uncle Albert think his way into his insights of how light bends around massive objects? No. I mean, even his own words suggest that 99% of his thoughts went nowhere. It was only when he would stop and swim in silence, that's so beautiful, to swim in silence, that the insight came to him. And so Einstein understood quite a bit that non-thinking was when the very clever, interesting insights came, and the thinking wasn't the path to these particularly unique and creative insights about reality. And so, again, it's conscious observation that seems to lead to these advancements, not thinking. Well, let's take thinking apart a little bit more, because what is it about thinking that helps us solve puzzles? And I've talked about this in other videos, but I think it was so insightful. 2001: A Space Odyssey, the movie, that may have captured when our ancestors invented thinking. And it was one of our ancestors looking at a bone and recognizing the bone could be what it isn't. So you jump out of the reality, which is it's a bone, and the bone suddenly becomes something that it's not, a weapon. And so the thinking world is filled with this kind of imaginary space where you jump out of reality into the abstract world where reality can become what it isn't. And you could say, well, that's great. But of course, we spend about 50% of our time now in this abstract world, mind wandering, disconnected from reality. And that's definitely been shown statistically to be at least partly behind our anxiety and depression, as I talked about in another video. But what I want to get to is the price that we pay for this Faustian deal. So we've made it central to our identity. Now, what's the bill to be paid? And if we look at one of the consequences of this abstract world that we spend so much time in, when it comes to war is a new invention of humans. And yes, humans have fought each other. Remember Monty Python, The Meaning of Life, fighting each other. And so it's been going on for a long time. But war, particularly in the 20th century, took it to a whole new level of disconnecting from reality and turning it into an abstraction, which was particularly dangerous and could end up being far more dangerous than anyone could think about. And so, what is war? And so, war is an abstract concept. It's not people fighting anymore. It's governments fighting governments, and government is an abstraction. And Stalin put it really well, because, of course, 100 million people died at the hand of abstractions during the 20th century. 250 million people died at the hands of their own government abstractions during that same time. And so, how did this happen on such a grand scale? What's the price to be paid for thinking? And Stalin put it pretty well when he said, 1 death is a tragedy, but 1 million is a statistic. And of course, what he's talking about is that transformation from being in reality, where death and murder is a horrific event, painful, and something to be painful in terms of consciousness, to an abstraction, which is no longer part of the real world, but part of this thought mindscape, where it's just far easier to deal with the abstraction versus the reality of the situation. In other words, turning death into an abstraction made murder far more easy on a far grander scale. And so the price that we pay, particularly when we get into anxiety, depression, and worry, is rather obvious when we look at one of the most popular therapies today. So if you get into therapy, or if you explore possibilities of different therapies, cognitive behavioral therapy absolutely comes out on top. It's the most evidence-based therapy. And what it does is it focuses on thoughts. It focuses on thoughts as the cause of depression, anxiety, and worry. And the idea is that in cognitive psychology, they've identified over 300 cognitive errors, thinking errors. And it's these thinking errors that, in other words, thinking is such a poor system, it works so poorly, and it creates all these errors that lead to our anxiety, suffering, and depression. And in fact, if you ask who are the happiest people on the planet, it turns out that's the people who don't think very much. The monks, the Ph.D, I talk about them all the time, this culture in South America that thinks very little but is probably the happiest group of people on the planet. And of course, kids. And anytime you're lost outside of the thinking world and in reality, or maybe listening to music, or just going for a walk and you listen to nature, and so you're not in the abstract world of thinking, you're in the real world, and none of your problems seem to make it to the real world. And so when we contemplate whether this Faustian deal was worth it, what we really have to ask ourselves is the cleverness, the puzzle-solving abilities of thinking, are they more than what we think they are? Have we convinced ourselves that the cleverness of thinking is worth the deal when the price to be paid is war, anxiety, depression, worry, and really what we could consider all the negative aspects of what it means to be a modern human? So, was the deal worth it? Leave a comment, because if I've missed something, if there's some amazing thing about thinking that I've missed, leave me a comment. Let me know.